In this episode, I sit down with Mimi Hayes to talk about brain bleeds, book publishing, and what it's like to be a comedian in New York City. Get excited because this is Tiny Leaps, Big Change. Welcome to another episode of Tiny Leaps, Big Changes, where I share simple strategies you can use to get more out of your life. My name is Greg Clunis, and in this episode, I'm sitting down with, how should I describe her? One of the most unique individuals I've had the pleasure of speaking to. Her name is Mimi Hayes, and she first came into my world because she was a listener of this show. She moved from... Mimi, where are you from?
Denver, Colorado.
She moved from Denver to New York City with absolutely no opportunities lined up, which is probably one of the most insane 1980s type moves I've ever heard of. And since then, she's just absolutely created an incredible platform for herself and accomplished one of her biggest goals, which is to get a book published, something that she came here with about this incredible story of just being put in a very life-threatening situation. And so I'm going to let Mimi expand on that in this conversation, but I want you guys listening to this to really think about this conversation as where you could be. When Mimi first reached out to me, she had just moved here. She had no job lined up. The book wasn't even like it. She had no clue how that was going to happen or if it was going to happen. And since then, in the last year, almost 2 years, she's really created something for herself. So no matter where you are starting from, if you have no idea what you're doing or how you're going to get there, just remember that by taking those tiny leaps, you can make something happen. And then from that something, you can turn it into something else. So Mimi, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's start with what I think is potentially the most interesting question and obviously the most fascinating thing about you. You wrote an entire book around it. What happened? What happened to you? Why were you in the hospital? Why did you have to relearn how to write and function? And tell us what went down.
Yeah. So, it was just one of those really weird things where I was at this point in my life where a lot of things were changing. I started teaching. I was getting into my student teaching career in Colorado and kind of been through a lot since graduating college. But all of a sudden, some things weren't right with my health. I was kind of dizzy. I was having these weird kind of pressure headaches out of nowhere. And pretty soon we found out what was happening after several kind of misdiagnoses. And I had a brain hemorrhage. So that was crazy because I didn't know that your brain could do that kind of thing. I didn't know that was what happened to young people, but it can. So yeah. Just
to add some additional context to that for anyone who maybe doesn't exactly know what a brain hemorrhage is, what's going on in the brain with that?
Yeah. So for me, when I was growing as a baby, they think what happened was a tiny clump of cells just kind of clumped up there in my brain. It wasn't doing me any harm. It was just kind of how I developed. And then for whatever reason, stress is was what I think happened. That structure just filled up with blood. Just randomly. So I guess it was for me, it was kind of like a slow motion stroke. So if you know about strokes, blood kind of gets into the brain and damages a lot of your brain. So for me, that got kind of kept in that little area. So I was really lucky in that sense because that's not the case for a lot of people. So pretty scary.